Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Serious. What are some creepy urban legends? Episode 3. The ones that terrify me the most is the slit mouth lady and pretty much any of them that include the bathroom that come from Japan. There is one where if you go to the third floor girl's bathroom and knock on the third stall when no one is in the bathroom, something will grab you and drag you in. There is also the one where someone will offer 2 toilet papers of assorted colors. Depending on which one you pick will determine how you die. And then there is one that happens for over a month at any bathroom you go to. Women can randomly appear. If I remember correctly, she will ask you a lot of questions, and you will have to answer her perfectly or die. The last question she asks will determine how or if you die. And then there is the one where a woman wearing a mask will ask you if she is pretty. After you answer her, she will take the mask off to reveal both sides of her mouth are slit. She will ask you the same question. If you answer her right, you will end up the same as her, but if you answer wrong, she kills you. Also, there is one about a girl cut in half, pleasing for help. I forgot exactly what happens, but much like all of these, depending on how you respond will determine what happens to you. I think I find these scary because it either requires being alone or knowing what to say. Also, for some of them, there is no tangible way to get out unscathed, and you never know when it's going to happen. It's almost like a game of chance. There's the urban legend here in Argentina that in the sugar mills they offer as a sacrifice to the familiar at least one worker per year, and when people get accidents or die in the mill, it's because of the familiar who is hungrier than usual and is most of the time kept in a tool room, separated from the more modern facilities. It's also told that better keep a crucifix in your person together with a face on your waist to defend yourself from its harm. Usually presented as a big black and ferocious dog, or a very well-dressed person. It is said that a family that is content with its meal will lead to better production for the year and thus more profit. There's this one about a serial killer in colonial Mexico. This was a man who became insane, convinced that his wife was cheating on him. Crazy with jealousy, he turned to a shaman, who told him that to know who was stealing his honor would require the sacrifice of his soul. After accepting, this man was told to wait outside of his house under a street lamp, and whoever would pass at 11 p.m. would be his wife's lover. The man does so, and when someone passes by, he asks for the time. The passerby answers 11 p.m., and the man responds, "Joyful are those who know the time of their death," and stabs him to death, upon learning that the one killed was his uncle, or son, or friend on variations of the legend. He repents and confesses only to see his own future hanging while praying in church. He either dies of fear or kills himself, and his ghost haunts that street lamp, forever seeking his wife's lover and stabbing whoever has enough bad luck to pass by at 11 p.m. The story usually ends with the one telling it asking his audience what time it is. I'm from a town called Lake Ronkonkoma, Central Long Island. We have the Lady of the Lake. Basically, back hundreds of years ago, this Indian princess fell in love with one of the European settlers. Since their love was forbidden by her father, she would paddle in a canoe to the center of the lake and float notes out to her beloved on the other side of the lake. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore, sent a final note, and then committed suicide. Every year for the last 200 years, at least one person has died mysteriously in the lake, mostly male. Some say it's the lady dragging in men looking for her lost lover. Bodies have been known to turn up in the Long Island Sound by Connecticut, despite Lake Ronkonkoma being a kettle hole in the middle of Long Island. This is a story that my older brother told me before, when he was away and still going to college. He was hanging out at his friend's house, usually guys' night out, drinking beer and talking about games, sports, etc. Then he went outside the balcony and took a break from them. He was hanging there for a couple of minutes when he heard some strange noises. It seems like some dogs are softly growling around the proximity. What's strange is he knew the place. He was sure that the neighbors did not have dogs. It made him uncomfortable and immediately got back inside. For confirmation, he asks his friend, the owner of the house, if his neighbors are now keeping dogs. But his friends quickly said no and went back to drinking. He just brushed it off and concluded that he is a bit drunk. After asking his friend, he goes to the kitchen along with his other friend to fetch some more ice and alcohol, but then he notices the bottled oil near the window in the kitchen slowly boiling. Moments later, the oil grew hotter and hotter, then eventually exploded. The bottle shattered, and the oil was all over the place. My brother and his other friend were dumbfounded. They froze there for a couple of seconds before bolting out the kitchen and telling their friends about what happened. The face of his friend, the house owner, is a mixture of shock and terror. He immediately ordered everyone to lock every door and window inside the house and ask everyone to call it a night. He then tells them that they should stay the night and will explain everything tomorrow. They immediately followed and rested that night. In the morning, while getting breakfast, his friend explained that they were being watched by an aswang, a ghoulish type of creature that is a human by day and takes the shape of an animal by night. These animals include dogs, birds, etc. He also added the bottled oil in the window in the kitchen serves as a warning. When it boils, it means an aswang is near. The mere fact that it exploded means the creature is incredibly near, may just outside the window, or there are more than one. My brother and his other friend were terrified hearing those explanations. I have one that is fairly good that is local to me in Syracuse, New York. This story is copied from Syracuse.com. I also lived in Solvay, about 3 to 4 miles out of Syracuse, and I can say there are a ton of cats now. Solvay's cats. As the story goes, there are no stray cats in the village of Solvay because the residents allegedly have eaten them. The origin of the feline feasting rumor is unclear but appears to date back to one of the world wars, when Austrian soldiers were starving and resorted to eating cats. Solvay had a large population of Austrian immigrants and thus, the rumor caught on. An 1898 Syracuse Evening Herald story told of how businesses were closed and houses were decorated with American and Austrian flags to celebrate the birthday of Franz Joseph I. The Solvay Process Company gave its 250 to 300 Austrian employees the day off to celebrate. Solvay was also the home of the Andreas Hofer Club, named after the Tyrolean leader in the uprising against Napoleon's forces. In his national column published in the October 8, 1990, Post-Standard, Jan Harold Brunvand wrote that he received a postcard from a reader, specifying that the recipes for preparing cat came from the Tyrol region, in the western part of Austria. While the claims of eating cat are dubious at best, and at worst, racist, the urban legend has lived on. Many solutions have learned to laugh along, including Katie Slack, a former Solvay high school student who joked in an April 1999 Herald Journal story that her high school is best known for eating cats, but the truth is, they only ate them on Sundays. I used to live in a small town in western New York. Right down the road from me was a road nicknamed Pigman Road. I don't recall the actual name. It's a one-lane road with no houses and close trees on both sides. The story goes that a man had a small house around the middle of the road. Apparently young children would go out there and harass the old man. So, one day he bought a pig, slaughtered it, then wore its head as a mask. That night when the kids came, he killed them and posted their heads on pikes. He would later go on to have multiple pikes with heads of children and pigs. Sometimes the legend is also mixed up with another, true, story from nearby. A train had derailed and fell into a creek. The wood-burning oven in the passenger car set the entire car ablaze. Only one person out of 20 made it out, and they were institutionalized because they never got over the smell of burning flesh or the screams. The city I grew up in had a good one. Just outside downtown Indianapolis is a huge abandoned old mansion. It's referred to as the House of Blue Lights. The urban legend is that there's no electricity running to it. No one owns it or keeps it up, yet every night if you drive by it, through the trees you can see what looks like blue lights shrouding the house. I've seen it before. Everyone who's driven by at night has seen the blue lights. If you didn't know the story, you just think it's some mansion that someone put blue incandescent lights around. The legend states that the blue light is from the ghost of the wife of the person who built the house. The wife was dying from cancer, and her husband built her a mansion, and she died shortly thereafter. Now that I'm older, I'm fairly sure the state owns it, and the blue lights are just in place by some groundskeeper who's been watching over the place for years. My friend broke into the property one day and found a really dope empty swimming pool in the back. But the urban legend is fun nonetheless. The ghost of the 13 curves. In a rural area near me, there is a road that runs alongside a creek. It's a dangerous road if you're not careful. It's a narrow path filled with sharp turns with an upwards cliff on one side and a downwards cliff on the other. Legend has it, almost 100 years ago, a bride and groom were making their way back from the wedding one stormy, fated night. The car slid off the road and down the cliff, into the creek. The groom survived and escaped. The bride was not so lucky. They say you can still see her on rainy nights, looking for her husband and warning other travelers of the dangerous conditions. A girl was home alone after her parents had left out of town for the weekend. She was in bed trying to fall asleep when she heard dripping coming from her bathroom. She goes to the bathroom to check the leaky faucet and finds that the faucet is turned off. She returns to bed. With her feet hanging over the bed and feels licking on her toes, she gets upset and blames her dog for doing this while she's trying to fall asleep. She starts dozing off but hears the sound of the dripping again. She returns to the bathroom and sees that the faucet isn't leaking. When she closes the door, she finds her dog lying dead with its throat slit. The blood had been causing the drip the whole time. There is this Italian story of this dog that every night sleeps under a girl's, his owner, bed. The dog every night licks the girl. One night the dog licks her, and then she goes to the bathroom and finds her dog dead in there. This story always scared me as a kid. Or another one, there is this guy that every morning finds out that his money and his food was missing. One night he puts a camera and goes to bed. The next morning, he watches the footage and sees a girl coming out from his basement and then stealing his money and food. He calls the police to look over the woman, but they don't find her. The next morning the man woke up in his basement tied, and the girl was now the owner of the house. Sorry for my bad English, but as I said, I'm Italian. Here in Georgia where I live, there is an urban legend that Lake Lanier is haunted. Every year many people die in the lake, sometimes by drowning in front of their friends/family, and other cases where they just disappear under the water and turn up dead days later. Many different stories are out there along with these, like people riding their jet skis who just disappear leaving the jet ski and turn up dead. You can Google search deaths/drownings at Lake Lanier and find countless news articles on them. There are a few where the circumstances are suspicious, but usually the coroner rules it as a drowning due to some unknown medical emergency since there isn't any solid evidence of anything else. Many times, the bodies are so badly decomposed that they cannot figure out what caused the person's death. People say that it's haunted because there used to be a town where the lake sits, including a cemetery that was forced out for the lake to be created. If you dive in certain areas, you can see the remnants of the old town and cemetery. Many people say that the spirits of that old town/cemetery haunt the lake to this day and cause a lot of the death that occurs. The lake is also a major source of drinking water for the Atlanta metro area. Drink up Atlanta. There was a ghost story in my village that some of the parents like to tell their kids, going on up until about 10 years ago. There was a train line that used to run between two towns in the early 1900s, and it runs right behind my village, separating one side of the village from fields. The train line is now a dirt track and nature walk with the train station converted into someone's house. But there was a story that I and some other kids were told back then, and I only asked about it recently for more context to learn where it came from. Apparently, there was a woman who had fun and a child before getting married to the father. This being early 1900s, before the First World War I was told, a lot of people were still deeply religious, and during the ceremony, on her wedding day, someone stole the baby from wherever it was being kept and took it away down the train line and just left it there to die. When the woman discovered the baby had been stolen, she went running around looking for it until someone told her they had seen someone walking to the tracks with a newborn. There she found her baby, freshly crushed by a train going over, and she just started walking, still in her wedding dress, and never came back. No one ever knew what happened to her, but it was assumed she wandered off somewhere to kill herself or find the person responsible. Now, it is rumored that if you go down that track in the dead of night and say, white lady, I killed your baby," she will appear in front of you and rip you in half because that's what happened to her kid. This happened when I was still a year old. My dad was part of the army in the 2000s, and we lived in Wales. I don't know the exact location of the town we were in. My parents would recall hearing noises at night, when one of them was not present at the time due to work or one of them simply going out, followed by my wailing. When I was approaching the age of 3 and developing my verbal skills, I would point at seemingly nothing and cry at the top of my lungs. Once my older cousin's friend came over to the house and witnessed me pointing out of the window trying my best to say, "There is a person." My cousin's friend ended up being so creeped out that they left the house early. In another incident, the back door of the house opened on its own, followed by me muttering, "The door." My parents checked the CCTV footage and were shocked to see the evidence. When we moved out because my dad was being sent to Brunei, the neighbors told us of the house's history. The house belonged to a family of 3. The son in the family came back from school while his parents were away and took a shower. When he finished, he slipped in the bathtub and cracked his head on the tap and started to bleed to death. By the time his parents came back, the boy was already dead, and the ambulance was called. The neighborhood has reported similar experiences to mine ever since the boy's death. A decade and some years later, I usually laugh this away with my cousin and parents, but I'll always wonder what was really going on. My grandmother was driving home one night. In her car was herself in the front, passenger side. Her husband was driving, and there were 2 others in the car with her. She looked right, glaring at the scenery, when she saw a dark figure with red eyes staring at her. This figure had to have been moving at least 50 miles per hour. A few seconds later, it flew away. Only 4 days later, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. That figure was a figure I personally fear. He goes by many names. Death, SCP-000X, but he is best known as the Mothman. Water babies. It's a legend that stems from the Shoshone Native Americans in Nevada. The Shoshones didn't understand Down syndrome or other deformities that affected them physically. So, if somebody had a baby with Down syndrome, they thought they were possessed by a demon. They then would take the babies to a body of water. I was told most of the time they would go to Lake Tahoe and drown the babies. The babies would then pull in anyone who visits the lakes alone, are said to make crazy loud noises and have blue skin and razor-sharp teeth. This is a common one in my hometown. It's typically addressed as the yellow bike story or something like that. Anyways, it happened around the 1950s, and there was a little boy who I think was 7 and had a bright yellow bike that his dad, who was the town's Trainyard grain distributor owner, had bought him a bright yellow bike, and this boy loved it, riding it all the time. Unfortunately, one day, he was riding home from school on the route he always took by a thick forest. It was a dirt road with thick forest encapsulating it on every side. The boy never came home that night as his parents called the police. A search that went on for years ensued, with the only thing that they could find was his yellow bike in pristine condition despite it sitting in the mud. The boy, or any clothing from the day he went missing, has yet to be found other than his bike, which was taken by the police and returned to the family. They chained the bike by his headstone years later, as he was ruled dead by this point. But the bike wasn't there one day, and has yet to be returned. If you drive down that same dirt road every once in a while, you get a really sad and depressing atmosphere, and if you walk into the forest, you'll sometimes see the bike in still good condition. Now, obviously youths are probably moving the bike around and hiding it, but others believe that he still rides it around, which is a comforting thought, more mostly as he would still be happy riding his bike. I live in Italy, and near my town there's a castle. It is said that a little girl lived there. She was an albino, and at the time being an albino meant to be somehow connected to the devil or something like that, so her mother dyed her hair black. The dye she used with time became light bluish, so she was nicknamed Azurin. Azzurro in Italian means light blue. One day, her father was away, battling somewhere, and she was playing in the basement, with 2 armed guards watching over her. She disappeared from their sight, and they suddenly heard a scream, and when they checked on her, she wasn't there, and her body was never found. Every 5 years, during the summer solstice, the day she disappeared, it is said that her ghost haunts the basement, crying and calling for her mom. I used to live in a town near a place called the Devil's Punch Bowl on the Surrey/Hampshire border in the south of England. The Punch Bowl was a large crater caused by glaciers at the end of the Large Ice Age, a beautiful place. One of the main roads, A3, used to go around the edge. There was an urban legend that in the 80s a woman in a black BMW couldn't see through the fog and drove over the side of the Punch Bowl. Every year in the anniversary of her death, people would report seeing an old black BMW driving normally in front of them, randomly lose control and crash into the Punch Bowl. Extra bonus story about that place. The road no longer follows the edge of the bowl, and it was replaced by the Hindhead Tunnel some years back. When the tunnel was under construction, they set up a viewing platform, as it was the biggest civil project in Europe at the time. Me and a friend decided to get some photos with my swanky new DSLR. To get to the platform, you had to walk through the woods, so we set out on a Sunday afternoon. About 15 minutes into the hole, we found a random grave in the middle of nowhere from the 1700s for an unknown sailor who was murdered by highwaymen. On our way back that night, as it got dark, we saw a group of people with candles and white gowns walking into the woods. Moped right out of there and got a pizza. Florida is full of these things, man. A couple of the ones I recall are the vanishing willow. The story basically goes that it's this huge tree, and in the spring, it blooms, and the strands form this perfect curtain. During the off-season, it's a neat, harmless tree. During the blooming season, if you happen to find yourself there alone, whatever you do, don't go in the curtain. You won't regret going in, mostly because if you do, you simply cease, erased, gone. Sometimes search parties will find your clothes tied to the tree or shoes hanging from a limb. And almost all of our sinkholes have some kind of lore to go behind them, though the one that always comes to mind I heard about before knowing the name of it, and it's called the Dead Hole or the Wailing Hole. For anyone familiar with the Devil's Millhopper, it's like that, but more occult, and with a history of explorers disappearing. It's just a deep, steep hole that drops more or less straight down. The story is that it was one of the mythical landmarks, like the Garden of Eden, though this one was the portal to the underworld, and had multiple celebrations from Native American to black masses. Like, these things dated back, supposedly, the documentation by explorers. Naturally, there's some wild stuff, particularly during severe weather or very windy days, left over from all the wild magic of yore. You go nearby before a hurricane or bad storm, and the sinkhole sings, calling out to you as the wind beats the rocks. Worse yet, not only does it simply sing or wail, hearing it compels you closer. And then once you're close, the irresistible urge to simply jump in. The drop is so large you pretty much die or become crippled on impact. This last one is a lot closer to home and an area I've lived in for a while. Much of North Florida is podunk nowhere. Trees, dead rivers, live rivers, weird noises, abandoned things where there shouldn't be anything at all. While this isn't an urban legend by the books, this is something that my friend group believes in pretty wholeheartedly. You see, I had a friend who had a weird house built on an old, dead river. For starters, it had a basement, and that in and of itself isn't usual in Florida. Electronics couldn't communicate outside of his house either. You stepped out the front door, everything worked fine. Went back inside, and boom, cell phones wouldn't work or anything. There had been other odd events too, like the time I was having a conversation with him, and while still talking normally, found myself rather surprised I had just turned and attempted to bodily throw myself down the flight of stairs while still carrying on the conversation. I would have too if he hadn't grabbed me. But this goes a bit deeper. He always had big parties. 10, 15 people. They always lasted overnight, blessing his parents, and we almost always played some kind of kids game. Manhunt, hide and seek, you name it. Well, one year, we're playing the game. A friend of ours, a big stocky guy, comes running up from the fence line that separates the old river path from his property, freaking out, said he saw something moving on the other side of the fence, eyes a bright red. We're a bit unnerved, but hey, it's the woods. Not sure what could have made them red, since there's not any light over there, but probably some animal or something. He told us it was pretty tall, whatever it was, maybe 6 feet up. Well, there's not really anything here that gets that tall, but coons can climb, though they usually don't get red-eye under a light. So, we break, get drinks. My friend wants to do some nighttime stuff and go out exploring the riverbed. Despite his freak out earlier, my other friend wants to come with me, and a third friend joins. I didn't go, So all I've got is hearsay, which was them screaming about an hour later and piling over the fence. Couldn't see anything chasing them, and they claimed they went pretty far back, straight from the house with one of the dogs, as far as I knew. All the dogs were inside the fence when they came back, and the dog freaked and bolted, leaving them in the dark. Something among the many bamboo groves caught their attention. They see this gleam of red and then the bamboo starts parting. They flip and run. We go out again later, myself included for once, though everyone is too shaken to cross the fence. This isn't the only time I've seen it, but it was the first, and we're at the fence, and we see these two little dots way out into trees. They blink out, then they're a bit closer. Changing height, sometimes further left or further right, always two of them. Well, we get scared and leave, tell everyone, and we lock ourselves inside, call it a night. I'd personally see them again on and off through the years, including once, right after starting my car and slamming the reverse as fast as I could. We had asked his parents about it, and his mom said nothing while his dad claimed it was cars going across the road back in the woods. Issue being kids are stupid and braver in the day, and several of us had made the trek down the riverbed to the fence at the far edge of the property just before the bridge. You can't see any part of his yard from the bridge, which was over a quarter of a mile through the woods away. The bridge isn't excessively big either, maybe 100 feet or so. It does so happen, however, there's a set of ghosts up through Florida, told to be the ghost of slaves, or a specific slave, that failed to escape while moving at night. Slaves that sometimes took violent measures, or were punished cruelly on their path. They were called Red Eyes or Old Red Eye, depending on the person telling whether it was a singular, violent spirit, or forlorn lost souls. The known calling card? A pair of burning, bright red eyes like blood floating in the air that would blink while slowly, maybe cautiously, getting closer.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.